There was once a fragile peace across the hills of Israel, the kind of peace that settles over a land like morning mist, delicate, temporary, gone before anyone thinks to hold on to it. For a young nation still learning what it meant to have a king at all, peace was a luxury borrowed against time, and time, as it always does, eventually called in its debt. Drums rolled to the valley of Elah in the gray hour before dawn, low and relentless, carrying with them the promise of war. No one in the camp needed to be told what that sound meant. Men who had been farmers only weeks before now lay awake beneath their cloaks, listening to that rhythm and wondering if they would live to hear it stop. "Hold the line, men. Tomorrow we face them," came the order, passed from soldier to soldier in the dark, like a held breath finally released. The army of Israel stood beneath the banner of King Saul, their first king, chosen not so long ago in a moment of desperate hope, a man raised up because the people had cried out for someone, anyone, to stand between them in a world of enemies pressing in on every border. It was still a new thing, this idea of a king in Israel. For generations, the tribes had been led by judges and by God alone, and now they had asked for a man to lead them instead, a man of flesh who could tire and doubt and tremble. And Saul trembled now. Even with thousands of soldiers arrayed behind him, his hands would not stay still, because among the Philistine ranks stood a warrior unlike anything Israel had ever faced. His name was Goliath, of the Philistine city of Gath, and stories about him traveled faster than any army could march. They said his spear's iron point was the size of a weaver's beam. Whether every detail was true hardly mattered. His shadow alone was enough to send grown men running, and every single morning, without fail, he walked out into the open ground between the two camps and dared any Israelite to come and die. To understand why his challenge carried such terrible weight, one has to understand the world these armies lived in. This was the age of single combat, when two nations facing annihilation might first send forward one champion from each side to settle the matter in blood before a full battle ever began. A brutal economy of war, sparing thousands of lives by wagering everything on one. To refuse a champion's challenge was not merely cowardice, it was to concede publicly that no man in your camp believed his God or his cause was strong enough to answer. Every morning that passed without an Israelite stepping forward was a morning of humiliation stacked upon humiliation, a slow bleeding of courage that no sword had yet drawn. "All right, men, shields up. We hold this ridge. No Philistine crosses into our camp," the Israelite captains ordered, though their voices carried less certainty than the words themselves suggested. And then Goliath would appear on the far ridge, unhurried, almost amused by the terror his very presence produced. "Well, well, look what crawled out of the hills. Is that supposed to be an army?" His laughter rolled across the valley and settled into the ranks of both nations like a stone dropped into still water. "They call me Goliath, and soon you'll be calling for your mothers. Send your best man or watch your whole nation fall before me." The Philistines were no minor rival to Israel. They controlled the coastal plain to the west, wielded iron weapons and iron chariots at a time when Israel had barely begun to master the forging of that metal for itself, and had pressed against Israel's borders for generations, a constant low-grade war, interrupted only by uneasy truces. A champion like Goliath was, in some sense, the Philistines' most efficient weapon. Not simply a sword among many, but a living argument that Israel's God and Israel's newly crowned king could not protect his people. Every morning Goliath walked out unanswered, that argument grew a little more convincing and a little harder to unmake. No one moved, no one dared. "Someone get the king, he needs to see this," a voice cried out, and Saul was brought to the ridge to witness what 40 days of silence had already told him. "Which one of you cowards wants to die today first?" Goliath bellowed, and the king stood frozen, unsure how any man alive could stand against such a monster. Dread settled over the entire camp like dust that would not lift, thick enough to taste. In desperation, Saul sent riders out through every town in Israel, calling every able man to war. because if faith could not move his army forward, perhaps sheer numbers still could. One such rider came, hooves throwing up dust on the quiet road to the small town of Bethlehem, where an old farmer named Jesse lived with his 8 sons. Bethlehem in those days was a place of low stone houses and terraced fields, a farming town whose name meant little to the wider world, a place where the loudest sound most mornings was sheep bleating on the hillside, not war drums in a distant valley. It wouldn't stay unknown for long, though no one in that town could have guessed why. "The king has called for every able man to fight the Philistines," the rider announced, and Jesse's older sons answered without hesitation, the way young men do when the alternative is being thought a coward by their neighbors for the rest of their lives. "We will answer the call. We will stand for King Saul." Jesse pulled his eldest son close before he left, and in that embrace was every fear a father carries and rarely allows himself to speak aloud. Israelite fathers of that era did not simply send sons to war, they sent the future of their household, their name, their line, into a valley where a giant waited every morning to end it. "Son, remember this," Jesse said, his voice steady even if his hands were not. "A soldier's courage means nothing without faith behind it." His son answered with the fire of a young man eager to prove himself worthy of the family name. "This is finally my chance to make you proud, father." From the doorway, unnoticed by anyone, the youngest of the 8 brothers watched in silence. David was still considered too young for war in his father's eyes. Not a child exactly, but not yet counted among the men either, caught in that particular loneliness of being the last one left behind while everyone else's life moves forward. Someone had to stay and mind the sheep. He said nothing, but something in him ached to go. The next morning, his brothers gathered their gear, worn sandals, borrowed swords, bread wrapped in cloth for the road, and marched off towards King Saul's army, leaving David behind in the stillness of the fields. "I can't believe they left me without me again," he muttered to no one, watching the dust of their departure settle back over the road as though they had never passed at all. It was during these long days that David came to know a particular kind of solitude, the shepherd's solitude, hours stretching into days beneath an open, indifferent sky, no company but the flock, and if he was honest with himself, God. Shepherding was not romantic work. It was hard, watchful, often thankless labor, carried out by the youngest and least regarded sons of a household, sleeping in the open with a staff and a sling as the only defense against wolves, thieves, or the wild animals that came down from the hills when hunger made them bold. It was this very unregarded work, this life no one else wanted, that was quietly shaping something in David that no battlefield could have taught him. Patience, sharp watchfulness, and an unshakable trust that he was never truly alone out there in the dark. That trust was tested more than once. A lion came for the flock first, low and fast out of the brush, and David did not run. Whatever fear rose in him in that instant, he met it, driving the beast off with nothing but his sling and a courage he could not fully explain even to himself. Later, in the black hush of night, a bear came for the sheep as well, and again David stood his ground, chasing it back into the hills with his heart hammering and his hands somehow steady. "Looks like even the bears know better than to mess with bees," he said afterwards, breathless, almost laughing at himself in the dark, the kind of nervous laughter that follows a brush with death. That one was way too close. He knelt beside a frightened lamb and steadied it with a hand. "Hey, it's all right now. We're safe." Alone again beneath a wide field of stars, David lifted his voice, not in triumph, but in something closer to gratitude, a private song meant for no audience but the sky above him. Out here in the fields beneath the open dark, his heart still sang its praises high. God's love surrounded him like the evening light, and through every star he could feel that presence drawing near. He sang of a God who stayed close by his side, who left no corner of his soul without reach, of a grateful heart offered up freely, of a courage that would not falter when danger came, because his strength was not his own, but borrowed from somewhere infinitely deeper. Even when the wolves crept close, he would not run afraid, for that same hand had never once let him down, and in the silence of the night he could still hear it speak. These were not the songs of a boy performing piety for an audience.
They were the private language of someone who had already learned, long before any giant stood in his path, exactly where his strength came from. It's worth pausing on this, that the courage David would be remembered for was not forged in the moment he faced Goliath. It was forged here, in obscurity, in the unwitnessed hours of an ordinary shepherd's life where no one was watching except the God he was singing to. Days later, his errand changed. "Time to carry some food out to my brothers," David said to himself, and the next morning he set off before dawn, leaving the flock in the care of another shepherd boy. "Take care of them for me," he said. "Will do, David. Safe travels," came the reply, and David walked the long road towards the camp, hoping he could find his brothers somewhere among the thousands of tents.
At the edge of the army's encampment, a soldier stopped him, eyeing the boy with the kind of suspicion soldiers reserve for anyone who doesn't look like he belongs on a battlefield. "Hey, what's a kid doing wandering around out here?" David explained himself plainly. "I brought food for my brothers. The fighting's about to start." The soldier gestured toward the ground. "You can just leave it here with me." But David shook his head. "No, I need to find them myself." "Where do you think you're headed?" the man pressed. "I'm going to find my brothers," David answered, already walking past him. And somewhere behind him, a voice muttered half in disbelief, "Oh no, don't tell me he's headed for Goliath." He pressed forward into the camp itself, just as that same terrible voice rolled across the valley once more, as it had every single morning for 40 straight days. "Sharpen every blade tonight, men, because by sunset, not one Israelite will still be standing." A ripple of dread moved through the soldiers around David, hardened men reduced to silence by nothing more than words carried on the wind. "Wait, I hear something," someone murmured. "Oh no, here he comes again." David turned toward the ridge and saw him for the first time with his own eyes, the sheer, impossible size of him. "Is that Goliath?" "Cowards, face me if you dare," the giant roared into the silence, and no one answered. "There's no way anyone beats that thing," a soldier whispered. And David, still holding the bread meant for his brothers, asked the question no one else in the camp seemed willing to ask aloud. "Who said that? Who is this, and why won't anyone stand against him?" "You can't fight someone like that," came the answer, flat and final. "Nobody can." But something in David refused to accept that as the end of the conversation. "Somebody has to do something," he said quietly. And when no one else spoke, he said it again, louder, meaning it fully this time. "If no one else will face him, then I will." The words reached his brother Eliab before David had even finished saying them, and Eliab turned on him with all the frustration of an older sibling watching a younger one wander cheerfully toward disaster. "Eliab, are you out of your mind? You think a boy like you can beat a giant?" David did not flinch from the question. "I know he's massive, but I believe my God will stand with me." "Listen to me, little brother," Eliab said, his voice dropping, almost pleading beneath the anger. "Go home before you get yourself killed." "No, Eliab, I won't just stand here and watch this happen." Around them, soldiers were already shaking their heads. "Wow, this kid's lost it. Somebody tell the king right now." Word of the boy's defiance traveled quickly through the camp until it reached King Saul himself, sitting in his tent with the particular exhaustion of a man who has not truly slept in 40 nights. "My king, are you troubled?" an attendant asked. "No, of course not," Saul answered too quickly. "You can talk to me if something's weighing on you." "I said I'm fine. What do you need?" "My king, someone outside claims he's willing to face Goliath." Saul's eyes lifted at that. "Send him in at once." David stood before the king of Israel, and Saul studied him with open disbelief. "I'm David." "Is this some kind of joke? You're just a child." There was a weight in the king's voice beyond mere doubt about David's age, the weight of 40 days of failure pressing down on a man who had once been chosen because the people believed he could save them, and who now feared he could save no one. "Dear God," muttered Saul, almost to himself, "why have you turned from us?"
It was David, a shepherd boy with no rank and no armor, who answered him. "My king, he hasn't turned from us. He's only waiting for someone to believe again." Saul studied him a moment longer. And what would a shepherd boy know about faith? David's answer came without boasting, only the plain report of what had actually happened to him in the quiet hours no one else had seen. "When a lion came for the flock, I chased it off. When a bear attacked at night, I drove it back. It wasn't my own strength, it was my faith that carried me." Something shifted in the king's face, the smallest crack of hope finding its way through exhaustion. "Maybe you really are meant for this," Saul said slowly, as though testing the idea even as he spoke it. "If your God truly walks with you, then go, be my champion." "Thank you, my king. I'll give this everything I have." Saul watched him go, murmuring almost like a prayer, "God be with that boy." There's an old memory that belongs earlier in David's story, though it rises now like an echo as he walks into the valley. The day the prophet Samuel had come quietly to Jesse's house in Bethlehem, passing over each of David's elder brothers, each one taller, older, more obviously suited to greatness, until he came at last to the youngest, still out with the sheep, and anointed him instead. "Anoint him, for he is the one chosen," the word had come, though no army, no crown, no giant had yet entered David's life to explain why. It was a promise made long before there was any visible reason to believe it, and now, walking into the valley of Elah with nothing but a staff, a sling, and 5 smooth stones gathered from a stream bed, David carried that old promise with him like a second heartbeat. Even walking through the darkest valley, he would fear no evil, for that presence was with him still, just as it had been in every quiet field and every long, unwatched night that had brought him to this one. Goliath saw him coming and could barely contain his contempt. "This is Israel's champion, a mere child?" He laughed, the sound rolling across the open ground between the armies. "Do you even know who I am?" David's answer was steady, without a trace of the fear that had gripped every soldier in Israel's camp for 40 straight mornings. "I know your name, your reputation, and your pride, but unlike the others, I don't fear you." "Is that so?" Goliath sneered, hefting his spear. "I'll snap you in half and leave the rest for the vultures." "I come with a sword and a spear, but I come in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel's armies, the very God you have mocked." Goliath's laughter turned to scorn. "Fool, your God sent you here only to die." David did not slow his pace. "Today the Lord will hand you over to me, and every nation will know there is a God in Israel." What followed lasted only a moment, though it would be remembered for thousands of years afterwards. A hand reaching into a shepherd's bag, a stone set into worn leather, a single practiced swing, the same motion that had driven off a lion, driven off a bear, performed now before 2 armies with the whole future of a nation balanced on its accuracy. The stone found its mark, and the giant who had haunted Israel's camp for 40 mornings fell forward into the dust of the very valley he had claimed as his own. For a heartbeat, silence held the battlefield completely, a silence heavier than any of the 40 days of taunting that had come before it, both armies frozen in the same disbelief. "No, it can't be. He actually did it. The boy brought down the giant." Then the silence broke apart all at once into a roar. "Rise up, men! For Israel! For Israel! For Israel! For Israel! They're retreating! We have to move now!" The Philistine army, stripped in an instant of the champion it had leaned its entire confidence upon, turned and fled back across the valley, and the army that had cowered in silence for 40 days found its courage all at once, chasing its enemy through the open field with a fury 40 days of humiliation had only sharpened. "Forget formation, just run for your lives," a Philistine soldier cried, while behind him the Israelites pressed forward without mercy. "Push forward now! Our God fights beside us. Show them no mercy. Run!" And so the giant's story came to an end in the dust of the valley of Elah, ended not by the mightiest soldier in Israel's camp, but by the one no one had thought to count, a shepherd boy who had already learned, long before that morning, exactly where his strength came from. But the story of David, the boy who trusted a God he could not see, in fields no one else was watching, through nights no one else remembered, was only just beginning.